is the 13th of the 6th, 2025. The time, 3 minutes past 10. One topic on the docket today as far as F1 centric threads at which we need to pull. In the first instance, out you're an absolute legend. In the second instance, we need to discuss this clash between Ted and Maximilian Verstappen. Now, let me say, full declaration at the outset. I've always been a big fan of Ted Kravitz. Hard-hitting journalism, gets to the core of the issues, pulls no punches. However, there is a history here, lest we forget that Red Bull once embargoed Sky Sports F1 because of Ted Kravitz' incessant talking of 2021 injustice et al. That was then, this is now. But again, the broader context is this. At last race weekend, the Spanish Grand Prix, the one that they call Rachel Brooks, again, a broadcaster over at Sky Sports F1, the internationally syndicated broadcaster, said the following: "Did you do it deliberately, Max?" To which Max said, "Does it even matter?" Now, the reaction to that was divided by the F1 community. Some said, "Bravo, Rachel Brooks, asking the hard-hitting question." Some said you were being unfair, that it was disgraceful tabloid-esque journalism, for which Rachel Brooks received in turn some very shameful AB online. There is no place for that in F1. But again, we've got to set the table. The context to this interaction between the soon-to-be five-time champion and Ted Kravitz is key. I want to say this out in front. I've been listening to, this was meant to be a preview video, and I've been listening, going back and doing a lot of due diligence as far as Max Verstappen and his cheeky love kiss with King George Russell of Kingsley in Norfolk. And I will say this, as much as I love me some Maximilian Verstappen, God tier settings, brilliant F1 peddler, manipulates the car in and on around the limits of adhesion in a way that I've not seen too many F1 drivers do in history. That being said, he cost himself 9 points last race unnecessarily. We can't praise Max Verstappen for being so God tier, so brilliant in one breath, and then not criticise him in the next, particularly if, as Max Verstappen fans, we want him to win a 5th consecutive. I hope desperately, pray to the racing gods, that he doesn't lose the championships by the 9 points that his tempestuous, that his temperament or lack thereof cost him last race. That being said, there was an interaction in the last 24 hours as the drivers arrive for the Montreal Grand Prix round 10. This is what happened, chat. We'll play the clip and then we'll react to it. Please continue.
Just a question about going forward, the negotiation with the stewards or race director on whether places should be given back or what. Since Jonathan Wheatley went, obviously you've got Stephen Knowles who's doing it. I assume it was him who told GP to tell you to give the place back to George, which wasn't the right call. The stewards later confirmed that. How are you working that out with him? Obviously, he's not been in the job too long since Jonathan's gone to Sauber. How are you working that out, that same situation doesn't happen again?
I think it's not really nice to try and single out a person, to be honest, because that's never the case. So I think we just look at it as a team, what we always can do better, and that's also how we look at it in Barcelona. But it's not fair to now single out one single person.
I don't think I was singling him out. I just named him. I named who he was, and Jonathan Wheatley's obviously a well-known guy. I wasn't saying it was Stephen Knowles' fault. I was saying that he has the new... Well, Jonathan Wheatley was a well-known guy. He was your rules guy, and now he's the new guy.
Yeah. So we're talking about him, so you're singling him out.
Okay, but he's on the pit wall. He's a fairly well-known
Well, I do not need to discuss that anyway here. Okay, if we ever look at things that we can do better, we do that, like every other team. But I'm not going to stand here in front of the camera and say who was at fault exactly. I mean,
I wasn't asking.
We all live and learn.
I wasn't asking you to do that. Just to be clear, I was asking how you live and learn. Exactly. I think you answered it. Okay, thank you.
Oh, the humanity. There are so many different threads at which we need to put. In the first instance, bravo Maximilian Verstappen for standing his ground and batting back the full frontal of Sky Sports F1's Ted Kravitz. It's not my place, chap. Am I the strategy guy? Am I Hannah Schmidt? Why am I talking about that? Am I the director of racing? No, I'm not, Ted Kravitz. So why then are you asking me these questions about continuous improvement under the auspices of me being that Bravo Maximilian Verstappen? But in the first instance, the question by Ted Kravitz was one worded as follows. What are you going to do going forward to fix that? Of course, it's not Maximilian Verstappen's remit. This is Christian Horner's question, but it's a pertinent one. What are they going to do, Red Bull, Christian Horner, Hannah Schmidt, Stephen, what's-his-face? What are they going to do to fix for the multitudinous foibles and errors of the unforced variety going forward, lest they wish to repeat the mistakes of Christmas past, bad pit stops, poor strategy, putting Max Verstappen on fresh hards as opposed to leaving him out on scrubbed softs. What are we doing here? Scrubbed softs. Surely that's the option. With 10 laps remaining of the Spanish Grand Prix round 9. Surely that's the option. Now, everybody, I get it, can be a god-tier Monday morning quarterback. Hindsight is always perfect, always 2020. But yet and still, I feel like this is becoming a pattern as far as Red Bull and Maximilian Verstappen. And again, we have this conversation under the umbrella heading of whether Max will see out his contract to 2028, and that the probability of that happening is diminishing more and more, not by the week or the month or the year, now by the second. Ted Kravitz asking some techier than techie things question. Now, was he disgraceful? I would argue probably not. The follow-up question, pushing, trying to turn the screw on Maximilian Verstappen, probably. Max Verstappen fans won't like that across the world, but ultimately, Mr. Verstappen stood his ground. I want to listen to it again, though, chat. Should we go again? Because it's important, this. I think it's a seminal moment, not just as far as the championship, but the Canadian Grand Prix race weekend. We'll go again. Please continue.
A question about going forward, the negotiation with the stewards or race director on whether places should be given back or what. Since Jonathan Wheatley went,
I want to make a point here. It's really, really important. Chat, tell me, when was the last time you saw stewards come out after the fact and say, oh, we weren't going to investigate that anyway? I'll wait. Never happened. Ever. So why are they doing it now? Of course, Maximilian Verstappen was in the right, came over the radio and said to his race engineer GP, why am I giving the place back to George? He yeeted me off. I had no other option but to go down the run-off area, and therein lies the etymology, the genesis story of the incident about which everybody is talking at the Spanish Grand Prix, the cheeky love kiss between King George Russell of King's Lynn, Norfolk and Maximilian Verstappen, for some say soon to be 5-time champ. But when have the FIA ever done what they did after the Spanish Grand Prix before? Feels a bit dodgy. It feels a bit sports entertainment as versus sports. And again, probably another conversation but for another day. But they shouldn't be doing that, the FIA, if past this prologue. If we establish the rules and robust governance under the umbrella heading of precedent.
Obviously, you've got Stephen Knowles who's doing it. I assume it was him who told GP to tell you to give the place back to George, which wasn't the right call. The stewards later confirmed that. How are you working that out with him? Obviously, he's not been in the job too long since Jonathan's gone to Sauber. How are you working that out, that same situation doesn't happen again?
I think,
Ted, it's not Max Verstappen's job. When you say you, I hope you're using plural. How is it Max Verstappen's job? Why are you asking him that question? Well, some would argue that Ted Kravitz understands virality and he's being deliberately antagonistic, trying to push and prod at Max Verstappen with a view to get himself an inverted commas clickbait headline. But I digress.
it's not really nice to try and single out a person, to be honest, because that's never the case. So.
And what people have criticised him for, particularly the British press and media previously, is doing that, coming over the radio. GP, what are you talking about? You guys are giving me this rubbish strategy and I'm trying to save it. Now Max Verstappen's doing the opposite. You're criticising him again. That's not consistent, nor is it set fair. Continue.
I think we just look at it as a team, what we always can do better, and that's also how we look at it in Barcelona. But it's not fair to...
And isn't that what you're supposed to do? As a leader, as a motivator, as an innovator, as a disruptor informer. Surely that's what you're supposed to do, to egg the team on. Ted Kravitz and Rachel Brooks et al. Pinks and the rest of the crew over at Sky Sports F1 were the first to criticise Max Verstappen when he wasn't saying that. So surely now he deserves some praise if we're playing consistency games. Continue.
To now single out one single person.
I don't think I was singling him out. I just named him.
Well, Ted, you did, but by naming somebody implicitly, you are singling them out, surely, for blame, culpability as far as the circumstance that was the Spanish Grand Prix and the failing of it from a Red Bull perspective. Of course you were, Ted Kravitz. Let's not do these semantic games. What are you on about?
Named who he was, and Jonathan Wheatley's obviously a well-known guy. I wasn't saying it was Stephen Knowles' fault. I was saying that he has the... Well,
Max, don't fall into the journalistic trap here. What was unsaid from Ted Kravitz as far as his principal supposition was important, as important even as what was unsaid, or what was said even. Here's what Ted Kravitz didn't say. He didn't say necessarily that Stephen was culpable, but in putting him forth into the conversation, of course, Ted Kravitz is suggesting it, trying to trip up Maximilian Verstappen. And I think it's important that Max was not tripped up again if he harbours aspirations of winning races and therefore championships. Pay this stuff no mind. Disgraceful, was it? I wouldn't go that far, but this is a difference in extents now as far as Ted Kravitz's line of questioning as versus Kynes.
Jonathan Wheatley was a well-known guy. He was your rules guy, and now he's the new guy.
Yeah. So we're talking about him, so you're singling him out.
Okay, but he's on the pit wall. He's a fairly well-known
Well, I
person.
do not need to discuss that anyway here.
Okay,
you know, if
general...
we ever look at things that we can do better, we do that like every other team. But I'm not going to stand here in front of the camera and say who was at fault exactly. I mean,
I wasn't asking.
We all live and learn.
I wasn't asking you to do that. Just to be clear, I was asking how you live and learn. Exactly. I think
that was Max's initial response, Ted Kravitz. But you plucked and prodded with a view to get a headline from Maximilian Verstappen. Now, some might argue that that's the responsibility, no duty, of these accredited F1 journalists to poke, to probe, to ask testing follow-up questions. But again, some, particularly on this side of the fence, the Brits, the guys and girls over at Chris Harris on Cars podcast, will say that that line of questioning of a chariot of fire driver, as of an F1 peddler, a fire-breathing dragon like Maximilian Verstappen, is unfair, disingenuous, disgraceful even, that you lack respect, and what you're doing is viral fishing. Techier than techie things. I think there will be ramifications for Sky Sports F1. Don't be naive enough to think that there won't be, that potentially we'll get ourselves another embargo on Sky Sports F1 and Red Bull, Maximilian Verstappen, Christian Horner. Who would want to talk to them if indeed we're playing honest, questioning, journalistic integrity games? I mean, it will be techier than techie things. Between now and next time the prosecution rests, no further questions, Your Honour.